I really appreciate you making time for me, Congressman. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. And obviously, the elephant in the room is the criminal case. And so, my first question to you is: Kansas, your office has previously said this was a mistake, that it was an unintentional mistake. But Kansas has prosecuted people for similar errors under Chris Kobach. So why shouldn't you face prosecution in this situation?
Well, I'm going to leave the legal particulars to my attorneys, but this, I will say that this is a complete political hit job. It's similar to what President Trump faces with his never-ending investigations. You know, basically DA Kagi and Jake Letourneau's corruption could have been, out of Adam Schiff's secret SCIF. And I should know because I was in the SCIF. Now, I put my mailing address instead of my physical address on a voter registration and inadvertently received a ballot for the incorrect, I believe, Topeka City Council race. Now, that's a mistake, not a felony. So even Chris Kobach himself questioned whether he was surprised to see how the case was handled, wondering why the DA would bring charges rather than referring the matter to an independent elections security board. So
well, that elections board doesn't really handle these types of cases. But rather than get into that, I mean, but you're a congressman. I mean, what would you say to constituents who are confused how a congressman could make a mistake on something as fundamental as a voter form?
Sure. Well, I use my mailing address because that's what we do when we deploy. And before this, I spent most of my career in Iraq and Afghanistan, over 8 years in the sandbox. And so out of habit, my address is my mailing address. And I wasn't hiding the ball, Brian. You know that I know that my address is public. And so if I were to claim to live somewhere that I actually don't, why on earth would I choose a retail location where you can't even possibly live? I would choose a residential location. But again, I didn't gain any advantage by receiving the wrong ballot. There was simply no motive, which is why this, of course, is a mistake. Now, the city council elections wasn't even on my radar. I'm not proud or ashamed of that. It's just I wasn't tracking that. If I cared deeply about a candidate in the race, I would have endorsed him or her, donated to their campaign, helped raise money, as well as their profile. So again, as soon as I realized my error, I fixed it. I changed my residential address and cooperated fully with the authorities, taking time to meet with them, providing a full statement. My lawyers requested to meet with the DA, but he refused. So I answered questions from the sheriff's investigation. At no point did I lie or try and place blame onto a staffer. Reports to the contrary are fake news. Now,
you're saying, I do want to jump. Go ahead, finish that thought.
Let me just add this thought. I showed proof to the investigator how there are scores of Kansans who have made similar mistakes, and that even appeared in an article that you wrote. I believe that you identified a few handfuls of people who used the very same UPS store that I used on their voter registration. So none of them have been charged with felonies, and none should be. So my UPS store is at the corner of 29th and Wanamaker, and I live in the Overlook Apartments about a mile and a half north. And
this claim that was in the most recent DA filing that you had said that a staffer had submitted incorrect work, you're saying that is false. You at no point claimed to investigators that a staffer submitted incorrect materials for you.
No. What I'm saying is that my office, like every other office, the product that we produce is a collegial effort between more than one person. That's all I was saying, was taken out of context and made into fake news to weaponize that against me.
On a voter registration form was a collaborative process?
Yep.
Because that's your personal form, not an official document of the office.
Again, Brian, this entire charade is an attempt to affect the outcome of an election. It's not really to get down to the bottom of this investigation. My attorneys can handle the more specific legal matters, but Kansas voters are smart. They can see through these bogus allegations, and they see that there's a blatant donor and consultant link between the DA and Letourneau. So so many Kansans have called and emailed expressing their support for my campaign and their disappointment in the DA and Letourneau and how they will never support either again. So listen, Kansas voters are smart. They see this for what it's worth. I admitted that I put the wrong address, and immediately after learning it, I fixed it. And then 10 months later or thereabouts, suspiciously moments before the televised debate and the day before voting begins is when the story breaks. And it doesn't do it through normal channels. Normally, the DA would go to attorneys. They go straight to the media with this.
Let's talk about that. You've talked about how it was unusual how this was announced right before a debate. My understanding is I think some of the candidates, probably including yourself, were already at the studio when the news broke. What was the scene like when you found out? And obviously you're there, and the other candidates are milling about as well.
No, are we going to eventually get to the race? Because that's the real story here. I mean, listen, this whole thing is what I'm sure reporters like you are eager to do is to blow this out of proportion. This is a mistake that I fixed months ago, immediately upon receiving it. In no way do these charges elevate to the level of felony. They know this. The DA and Letourneau know that in order to clear the high hurdle of a felony, the language is something to the effect of knowingly and willfully and nefariously intended to affect the outcome of election. I don't know. We'll let the lawyers handle that. But I put the wrong address and I fixed it as soon as I could. And Kansas voters know that, and that's why we received so much incredible support. And
sources have claimed that you were living at your parents' house during this time. Is that true? And were you trying to obscure that fact at all? Were you living at your parents' house during this period in 2019? I know that you don't live there now, but during this period in 2019.
Listen, again, you're trying to make this the centerpiece of my campaign. It's not. In between residences, there was a stretch of time like that my family was, where I was crashing with them in between residences. But again, what you're looking to do, as always, is to take a factoid and blow it out of proportion and make it sound as if it's nefarious or negative. Listen, I have served the people of Kansas proudly and with honor and integrity, just like I led people in combat for 8 years between Iraq and Afghanistan. And we're up against an opponent, Jake Letourneau, and now apparently he's colluding with DA Kagi, and that's an unfortunate story. But it doesn't negate the fact that Jake Letourneau is not even a very responsible conservative, as he voted for the largest tax increase in the state's history. And he sides with unions, and he's also backed legislation that would allow the government to seize property. So that's the story, is that you've got a career politician in Jake Letourneau versus a career outsider in me.
Let's move on to
I voted with Trump 96% of the time. I'm an honorary chairman of Trump's reelection campaign. I'm the only candidate endorsed by the National Right to Life and the NRA. Jake Letourneau is trying to collude and use payoffs and corruption to steal this race, and Kansans see through that.
There's a lot there that I need to follow up on. I was about to move on to coronavirus, but since you brought up the president, I'm going to jump to a question about him. So one thing is you didn't vote for the president in 2016 because you didn't vote for either candidate in 2016. What will it mean for you to vote for him for the first time in this election?
The president has taken notice of the fact that I vote with him 96% of the time, and so have my constituents, and that's what matters. My feelings on what matters to my constituents and what matters to the president is that I voted with him 96% of the time, and thus he's deemed me an honorary chairman of his reelection in Kansas. I'm proud to have that support from the president. I'm proud to have chatted with him and been to the Oval Office. I'm also proud to be the only candidate supported by the National Right to Life and the NRA.
Has the president made any decisions since the start of the coronavirus pandemic that you've disagreed with?
The president has made decisive actions since the very beginning, actions that some had labeled him as being racist for having done. I'm proud of the president's leadership. You know, we are facing not only the infectious disease part of the pandemic, but the global economic meltdown. And he's managed that with, in part, a coronavirus task force led by the steady hand of Vice President Pence. It's full of an incredible public-private partnership, and it's a whole of government approach. I'm very, very proud of how the president's handled the coronavirus.
Are there any ways where the federal response has fallen short on coronavirus? And if so, who's to blame? Is it an agency? Is it Congress? Where are the gaps in the response so far?
I think the president has done a fantastic job, and when compared to other countries, the U.S. has tested more people. We're leading the way when it comes to a vaccine and therapeutics. We've put together a public-private partnership that's the envy of the world. I'm proud of the president's leadership on this, and he's got my full and complete support.
One of the first bills you sponsored when you got to Congress had to do with suicide prevention for veterans. What progress has been made on that issue in the last 2 years, and what do we still have to accomplish when it comes to mental health treatment for veterans?
Well, obviously, it's a very personal subject for me. Veterans' health, particularly veterans' suicide, it's something that affects my brothers and sisters. It's just incredibly sad, and I think every day that goes by, I think about the veterans that we've lost and what we need to do to honestly put an end to the some 22 or so who die each year at their own hand. And so, I think about them every day. It's a very emotional issue for me. We need to continue making progress. And honestly, I introduced a couple of bills, supporting the epidemic. This is HR 5029, the VA Suicide Prevention Act, and HR 5030, VA Suicide Prevention Act Services Accountability Act. And both are hopes to prevent veteran suicide. And I've also co-sponsored HR 3495, Improve Wellbeing for Veterans Act. I wanted to be on the Veterans Committee, VA Committee, because obviously it's something that's so important to me. And I've done the very best I can to serve my brothers and sisters with honor.
You obviously recently stepped down voluntarily from your committee assignments in face of the charges. What work was in progress on those committees that you're now delayed on working from during this time?
Well, first, I stepped down from the committees voluntarily so that I can focus on the unfortunate situation created by my opponent, Jake Letourneau and D.A. Kagi. We are no less effective. I'm no less effective as a congressman. We are no less effective as a team for Kansas Second, and we'll continue to support the good work that my constituents are promised.
Michelle de la Isla, the mayor of Topeka, has outraised both you and Treasurer Letourneau for the past 2 quarters. She's going to come into the general election with some serious resources. This was obviously a very close race in 2018. If you do make it through the primary, are you going to have the resources to compete with her? Are you still going to be able to hold this seat red?
Oh, absolutely. The notion that this seat's in jeopardy in the general if I win is a flawed argument. They tried to beat me, and you followed this very closely, not always very well, but very closely. They couldn't beat me with Paul Davis and $8 billion. I'm sorry, $8 million. They can't. And Paul Davis was probably the most electable candidate for Kansas Second in 2018. He outperformed the incumbent governor, the Republican incumbent governor. So they had every reason to believe that they can beat a newbie like me. I was new to politics. I didn't enjoy the incumbency, didn't have the money. The DCCC sunk some $8 million into the race. Paul Davis was a seasoned pro for whom many moderates supported. And if they can't beat us under those circumstances with the very well-known Paul Davis, my guess is that Michelle de la Isla, the D-Trip, might have to sink some, 15 million into the race. I just don't see that happening. But what really matters more than money is the mere fact that Michelle de la Isla is a liberal Democrat who votes in lockstep with Nancy Pelosi to promote a radical socialist agenda, and that's not where Kansas Second voters are. Kansas Second, Trump won by 18, 19 points. Do you really see 18 points worth of people voting for President Trump and then turning around and voting for Mayor Michelle de la Isla? I just don't see it happening. I interface with my constituents every day, and they are not on board with the Michelle de la Isa, who's backed by Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and other radical liberals who are pushing an agenda that will destroy the foundation upon which our country is built.
Your campaign committee still has $250,000 in debt stemming from personal loans you made to the campaign in 2018. Has running for office been financially detrimental to you? I mean, has this hurt?
Hey, Brian, I'm not going to talk about my personal finances with you.
Well,
I placed money upon which a cause I believed in with passion, and these are monies that I earned in taking great personal risk with my boots in the sand in Iraq and Afghanistan. I do things with passion in life, fearlessness, and authenticity. Full stop.
Your father disclosed to the press earlier this year that the FEC was inquiring about contributions he made in 2018 through other donors. Your campaign has spent just this cycle well over $50,000 in legal fees. What is the status of this FEC matter involving your father and possibly your campaign?
I don't track the FEC matter regarding my father. You'd have to reach out to him and his consultants or attorneys.
What is your $50,000 in legal fees been for?
My campaign, we have legal fees.
Is it related to an FEC matter?
Not that I'm not tracking the expenses, and I'm not really tracking the itemized expense report with regards to those legal fees.
You mentioned that you've aligned closely with President Trump since arriving in Washington. Let's talk about that. You know, you're either going to be in a scenario where Trump is in his second term, or you're going to be dealing with Joe Biden as president. Can you talk about how your approach will differ between those two scenarios, and how your approach will be similar either way?
Well, listen, I really look up to President Trump. He's proven himself, and since the time he came down that golden elevator, I think we all had our questions as to kind of what type of president he'd make, and he's delivered on his promises made, promises kept, and we've done the same here with me and my efforts the last couple of years. People didn't know me so much back in 2018, and they've gotten to know me. We've received an incredible amount of support. We work frequently with the president's legislative team on various matters. We continue to look forward to doing the same. If President Trump is not reelected, we'll continue to represent the people of Kansas with honor, integrity, and passion.
You've made a couple allusions to Jake Letourneau and Mike Kage's shared consultant. I believe you're referring to Singularis, an Overland Park firm that works with both of them. That's a pretty big firm that a lot of Republicans in the region use. Jerry Moran uses them. Josh Hawley uses them. A large chunk of the Kansas legislature uses them. I mean, is that really evidence of a link when almost every Republican in the region is using them?
How is his entire portfolio? That question, the premise doesn't even make sense.
Well, you're saying that there is a collusion between Kage and Letourneau based on the fact that they share a consultant. My point to you is that many Republicans share that same consultant.
Listen, the point and the takeaway for the voters is that D.A. Kage and Jake Letourneau have colluded and used the law unethically, possibly illegally. I don't know. We'll let lawyers figure that out. And they've slapped me with ridiculous, bogus charges. And the story of this race is the fact that Jake Letourneau, who is acted in a completely unethical way, is driven by his ego, and people are seeing through that, and it's not working. So we're cautiously optimistic about the election in a week's time.
I mean, you're facing a similar charge to what folks faced under Kobach, which is voting without being qualified and unlawful advance voting. Kobach charged people with those. When I would talk to those folks, they would say they made a mistake. I mean, do you think perhaps Kansas was overly aggressive in its enforcement of these statutes in the past?
I'm unfamiliar with the particulars of those cases.
Obviously the president has talked quite a bit about concerns about voter fraud with the election upcoming. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get from you is, what cases do you think warrant prosecution if yours doesn't?
Listen, the idea of my case is that they're misusing the law, and it's obvious for many reasons, and it's not going to work because Kansas voters see right through these bogus charges. I don't know anything about the previous laws, can't comment on them, but every norm is broken when it comes to my case. As soon as I realized the error, I fixed it, changed my residential address, and cooperated fully with the authorities. This is a mistake, not a felony.
You've obviously been in the minority since arriving in Washington, the minority party in the House, which makes it tough to get legislation passed. That said, what is your proudest accomplishment during your first 2 years in Congress?
USMCA, and then also getting to know the good people of Kansas Second even more thoroughly. Like a simple flip through my social media, anybody could see that I've gone back to the district every waking moment that I could. And I came into the job wanting to deliver for the people of Kansas. One of the biggest pieces of legislation in this past term has been USMCA. That's NAFTA 2.0, free trade between North America, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And so I went to leadership, asked, how can I support that? Doesn't touch any of my committees. And they said, well, we'll make you the whip. And so I pushed heavily and worked the entire freshman class very thoroughly, and ultimately helped get that great piece of legislation passed. And that matters as it translates to jobs and money in my district, in my state.
So if you get through this primary, and if you go on to win the general election, are you confident that these charges won't be hanging over your heads, and we can get you back on the committees at the start of next term?
There is no way that what I did clears the high hurdle of a felony, much less 3. It was an accident. We fixed it as soon as we found out about it, and have fully cooperated. The DA, Kagi, Letourneau, and the consultants, they know that. They know that what I did is not a felony, but they just want to make me try and win a campaign with that around my neck. It's slimy swamp politics. It's what I've always run against, and Kansas Second voters are smart. They see right through the bogus charges, and I'm confident about a week from today.
Talk to me about, when we sat down, when you first took office, you talked a bit about how you had very experienced staffers, and you talked about how you actually compared it to working with locals in Afghanistan, how like you were going into this unfamiliar environment and you were getting people who could help guide you. I realize you're in a very different situation right now, but what from your service has guided you during this period?
A moral compass amid an environment that's austere and hostile and unfair, and that's called life. And so I make no excuses for the austerity and the incivility of the business. I'm not complaining in the least, but when Trey Gowdy says that he doesn't miss it, and he's seen more civility in a capital murder trial, he's not whistling Dixie. I've seen more civility in the deserts of Baghdad and Afghanistan than you see in politics, and that's unfortunate. And I'm trying to do as I've always tried, which is to kind of restore some civility and integrity to Congress. I went from one of the most respected institutions with military to one of the least respected, which is politics, in a hope that I can bring some of that respect over to politics and establish it as being full of selfless civil servants and patriots who are trying to make the world a better place. And that's led my actions. But unfortunately, I'm up now against Jake Letourneau, who is exactly the opposite. He is the swamp. He's the career politician. He's Lion Letourneau, who's trying to steal this race with the help of some bogus trumped up charges perpetrated by a corrupt DA.
You obviously, at the top of this interview, you compared the situation to what President Trump faced, but obviously President Trump was facing an investigation from, obviously first the FBI, but then later the Democratic House. You're obviously facing an investigation from a Republican prosecutor, and you're facing opposition from a Republican primary opponent who is using this issue, obviously. And prior to this, you had attacks from a former Republican governor who was very critical of you.
No,
Why do you think you're a target for people within your own party, I guess is my question.
Because I'm an outsider, and we see that with Trump as well. You know, Trump is not supported by the Bushes, not supported by Mitt Romney, because he's an outside fighter, just like me. So with that, you're going to get pushback within your own party. I wear that as a badge of honor. And people know that those who would push against me, Democrat or Republican, are swamp creatures, and that's why they vote for me.
And ultimately, with all of this, when people are reading headlines about Steve Watkins and these charges, or they might be seeing ads attacking you, why should the voters of the 2nd District send you back to Washington?
Because socialism is rising, and we see it in the streets, we see it in the halls of Congress. The victims are our values, the Constitution, and our very republic. The resolution to this are conservatives in Kansas and everywhere showing some Republican unity and voting in Trump-supported outside fighters like me, not career politicians like Jake Letourneau. And that is why I ask for your vote. I ask for people to vote for me on August 4th. And that's why I've been serving honorably for the past 2 years and garnering the support. Socialism is rising. It's everywhere. And we need fighters to push back against it.
And just again, if I could go back to one thing you said at the start of this interview, you talked about there be this voter registration form being a collegial work product. Can you just clarify why your personal voter form would be a work product for the office? Obviously the personal and the official.
That's getting into particulars that would have to leave up to the case. But this I'll say, all, if not nearly all, products that come from any office here in Congress are touched by more than one hand. And so that's not the story, Brian. You can try and make it the story.
So if I ask Sharice Davids or Roger Marshall about their voter registration forms, they're going to tell me that their staffers had a hand in it?
I have no idea, and I have to ask them, Brian. But the fact of the matter is you're once again trying to make an ancillary sidebar that's insignificant the centerpiece of the story. The story is that I put my mailing address instead of my physical address on a voter registration. I did so inadvertently, and that's when I received a ballot for the, I believe, city council race. That is a mistake, not a felony.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate your time. You took my questions, and obviously I respect that. I will talk to you soon. I assume, whether or not it will be in person or whether we'll continue to have to do it like this because of the pandemic. I guess we'll see.
All right, sounds good.
Any final thoughts before I let you go? The things I didn't cover that you think really we ought to highlight before I let you go.
Well, I would just want to say again, I want to thank the people of Kansas Second for their ongoing support and their ability to see past these bogus charges. Kansas folks know socialism is rising. We see it in the streets, and we see it in the halls of Congress. The victims are our values, Constitution, and our very country, our republic. And what we need to do to resolve this is to elect Trump-supported outside fighters. That's why I'm running. That's why I've got the support that I've got, and I'd ask voters to support me on August 4th. Thanks.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.